Welcome to Barnyard Language, honest talk about running farms and raising families. We are Katie and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us.
While this is a podcast for farm families, sometimes our content isn't for the whole family. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Barnyard Language, and Happy New Year, because by the time you listen to this episode, it's going to be 2025, a fresh new year. Not that it really, I'm sounding skeptical now. It doesn't mean a whole lot, but, you get to flip the calendar. You get a new calendar, maybe, if you're a paper calendar person, and you have to remember to write the new year if you have to write it down somewhere. So, Happy New Year, Katie. How was your Christmas break? I feel like I kind of already know the answer to this question, so I'm asking it with trepidation.
The first couple days were good. The kids were way overexcited. They got out of school early on Friday before Christmas. Everybody was way overexcited. So Christmas Eve was Tuesday, Christmas Day was Wednesday. So they had the one day of daycare on Monday. And they came home and they were, of course, way overexcited. We get to Christmas, everybody's still way overexcited. And of course, then they just want to play Xbox. They don't care about their new presents, whatever, magic of Christmas. Hooray. And then the girl child started puking. And then on the 27th, the boy child started puking. And then on the 29th, I think it was, I started puking. And my husband tested positive for COVID. Actually, the kids both tested positive for COVID as well.
Well, it was nicely staggered.
Now they are back at daycare and work, respectively. My husband has not started puking yet, which, I'm sure he feels like he's got a big old target on his back. But in all fairness, I share a lot more drinks with the kids. Not by choice, but, I'm an easy target, I guess.
Yeah, it was going to happen.
Yeah. But other than that, things.
So that was Christmas.
Yeah,
Just
Merry
sick.
Christmas. It was, honestly, it was kind of, until all the puking started, it was kind of nice because it was just quiet. Everybody here has been sick. I know that Jim said one of his friends was supposed to go to a family Christmas gathering, didn't go. Turns out 16 of the, I think, 30 people who were invited were unable to attend because they were ill. So that's about how it's going.
And the ones who showed up were like, why are we here? Maybe we're spreading something.
Yeah. The ones who showed up, I assume, were just pouring bleach on each other and Lysoling from a long distance.
Waving from across the room.
I will admit that I'm generally pretty antibacterial products because bacteria are good for us in a lot of ways. And also I have the memory span of goldfish and will never remember to sanitize things as heavily as they need to be sanitized for sanitizing reasons. But even I busted out the Lysol last week and was just like, nope, I'm going to spray everything. Everything is getting sprayed.
Yeah, if the pets stand still, they're getting it too.
Anyone and anything who comes into this house is getting Lysol. So, Merry Christmas, Santa. Lysol to the face.
Did you get anything fun for Christmas?
My husband bought me a new pair of work gloves, which is awesome because mine keep disappearing. And then he monogrammed them for me, which I actually thought was pretty sweet. He took a Sharpie and wrote my first initial on both of them so that no one will.
It was a real pretty monogram, the Sharpie monogram.
Yeah, real fancy monogram. And I got a gift card for the local yarn store.
But then when he steals them, he knows that he's stealing yours.
Yeah, it won't stop anyone from stealing them. It'll just make it a little easier to know who has them.
Yeah, that's right.
Did some last minute Christmas shopping at our local farm and home, along with approximately half the county. There was a lot of folks in there looking worried. So that was good. And yeah, it was quiet. It was nice. How was your Christmas, Arlene?
Overall, it's been really nice, and I should knock on wood or cross my fingers or toes or something. So far, we've stayed healthy. There's been so many years where it's just kind of like you described, where somebody goes down, and when you have a big family, it's like, well, I guess we're locked in for the next 2 weeks because everybody's going to get it. But so far, yeah, everyone has been healthy. We've been able to make it to the things that we had scheduled and planned. I think I mentioned before the holidays, we'd celebrated with my husband's side of the family before Christmas because his sister and her family were going away for a trip. So on Christmas Day itself, my parents came for brunch and we went over to my in-laws for supper, but it was just us, them, and his one sister. So it was pretty low key, quiet, no presents because we'd already done all that stuff. And my family gathering happened on the 29th because that's when my sister and her family had traveled to this end of the province. And we don't do any gifts for that gathering either, which kind of takes some of the pressure off. Then you don't feel like other than prepping food, you don't really have to bring anything, and you don't have to fit that into the day either. So it's just about spending time together. On a dairy farm, a lot of things don't really change a whole lot over Christmas. So we did chores as usual. Some of the stuff, cut corners, or maybe the cows here, we typically try and put out most days if it's not too icy or super cold, but on Christmas they stayed inside, so it's one less job to get them back in. And yeah.
If you feed the cows bourbon, will they give eggnog?
No, but maybe
It's worth a try.
maybe chickens.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I guess you need the egg part of the nog too, huh? The cows really only bring the nog part.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's where the spices come from. And what else has been going on with the sorry, clearing my throat here. The classifier is coming in January, so my daughter's one of her jobs has been clipping cows to get them looking nice, and we're also having a barn party this coming weekend. It's something we started a few years ago. Instead of having a Christmas party, we decided that we'd have kind of a New Year's party, but the weekend before the kids went back to school. So it's kind of turned into a bigger event than we originally thought it was going to be, but it's really fun. So we've got lots of people coming, kind of a drop in and out over the course of the afternoon. There'll be food and drinks and cows, and so that's all good stuff. And our barn has kind of an entry area where people can stay warm if they want to, or they can come out into the barn and see the cows. So yeah, we'll hang out with lots of our friends and neighbors on the weekend before everybody goes back to school. And it's a good excuse to get the barn cleaned up too.
The last several years we've done either New Year's Eve or New Year's Day and gotten together with some friends and their kids and had, little fancy lunch because we're all too old and nobody wants to pay a babysitter, and it's kind of a fun little tradition.
Yeah, and you don't need to stay up until midnight anyway.
Yeah, last year my daughter jumped/fell, depending on who you talk to, out of their boy's bunk bed and maxed out our insurance out of pocket on New Year's Day, which was great. This year we were trying to get together and then we all got sick, and I said, well, maybe, fingers crossed we'll be okay. And then their little girl had a planned, totally uneventful hernia surgery the day after Christmas. And we were still like, fingers crossed, maybe we'll all be okay. And then their little boy puked in the middle of the kitchen floor. And I was like, nope, maybe not.
This is not the year for gatherings.
Yeah, maybe in, a couple weeks, or
yeah, that's right,
June or whatever.
Yeah, when we can meet outside again.
Yeah, I was kind of laughing because I don't get high fevers very often, but I did with this illness, and I saw that your daughter posted a photo of a red and white heifer with some caption about it being the first red and white heifer since she was in the Pee Wee class at age 3. But with the confusion resulting from the fever, I thought she meant it was the same heifer she had shown 16 years ago, and I was like, that's a really good-looking cow for being
Wow.
17 years old, but why the hell did they have a 17-year-old heifer? And then I finally caught up on the whole thing, and I was like, maybe I ought to just take some Tylenol and go back to bed.
I'm a little confused.
Yeah. It's a nice looking heifer, though, so that's good.
Yes, yeah, she's quite pretty. All right, so why don't we introduce our first guest for the year? and we'll let you get back to work and do a few hours of work before next year starts.
Yeah, sounds good.
Today, we are excited to be talking to Jenny Jefferies, who is joining us from England, from South Cambridgeshire to be more specific. And Jenny, we always start each of our interviews with the same question. So we always ask our guests, what are you growing? So for farmers, obviously, that's usually crops and livestock, but can also include kids and businesses and all kinds of other things. So what are you growing?
Sorry, I'm going to interject. For those of us who were not geography majors, where in England do you live? Americans, we have like London, maybe Wales, and then Scotland is somewhere at the top. But that's it.
That's about it, really. But I live in South Cambridgeshire, which is a county just northeast of London by about an hour on the train. And it's in a beautiful little village called Little Gransden.
Now we can carry on.
All right. So now we've got my dog barking in the background today, and we're going to ask Jenny, what are you growing?
We are growing predominantly cereal crops. So we grow linseed, wheat, barley, rapeseed and beans, and we converted to regenerative agriculture about 10 years ago, and I've got two children who are 9 and 6 years old, and we're just growing our self-catering business as well, which we diversified about 10 years ago, and so yeah, we're very, very busy.
That is a lot of different things. So I know that with farmers, sometimes talking about acreage is complicated, but can you give us kind of an idea of the scale that you're growing at and being regenerative? Well, I mean, I guess any of us are, rotating crops. So kind of what does it look like on an annual basis in terms of percentage or, land base, what you're growing each of those crops?
Yes, so we grow about 550 acres on our arable farm here in South Cambridgeshire, and we converted to regenerative agriculture about 10 years ago, and we're predominantly growing all the crops that I previously mentioned, and we rotate them, and we have what we call bed and breakfast sheep. We've got a shepherd called Jacob, would you believe, who comes along and he deposits his sheep, and we rotate the sheep around the different fields to tread in their natural fertiliser. So it's predominantly those crops, winter wheat and spring barley, which is probably about 30%, and the rest of it is a combination of linseed, beans and cover crops like clover and stuff like that.
As someone who doesn't own sheep, it sounds like that's a really good way to have sheep but not be responsible for them.
Exactly that. Yes, definitely. We've got someone who comes in. It's a virtuous circle, actually. We're both very, very happy with the collaboration. So the sheep are very happy, they eat our crops. The shepherd's very happy because they're looked after very well. But you're right, we don't have responsibility for them. So we can go away on holiday if need be. But it's very lovely. It's very nice to see some livestock really taking advantage of what we provide in terms of cereal crops. It's really nice, actually. It's really good.
Jenny, I have to say, when you said he deposits them, I envisioned like a little night drop where he would come and, at like 2 a.m. and just sort of chuck them through a hole in the fence and then drive away really fast. So are they grazing the residue from your crops then? Is that...
Yeah, so they munch away crops, and they tread in their natural fertilizer just to sort of allow the nutrients and to allow all the natural goodness come evolve and make the healthy soil. It is what it is.
So I happen to know that you are growing things, but you're also growing in your own business and your career. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do when you're not involved in the farm side of things?
Yes, so I had never before seen a real life combine harvester until I met my arable farming husband on a blind date. And I was just really amazed at the hard work that goes into producing just a loaf of bread or a bowl of cereal. And so I actually felt quite ignorant and quite ashamed at my ignorance about how food is made and how it's grown and who does what and why and how. And so I've since published 5 story cookbooks that celebrate not just British farmers and fishermen in this country, but also around the world as well. So I'm a published author, award-winning published author, and also I write various different columns and articles for different publications here in the UK. And I also produce and present my own radio show, which is predominantly about food, farming, and fishing, to try and bridge that gap between producer and consumer.
Do you feel like your perspective as someone who didn't grow up in agriculture helps you when it comes to writing stories and your your books in terms of how you describe things or connect to people who maybe don't have that same connection?
Yeah, I think so. I think it really helps. I think it really benefits securing the language and being able to describe things. I don't think anyone can expect what people know, understand what yield is, for example. I had never come across a lot of the language, for example. And I think I think it kind of benefits me from someone who had no background in cooking, food, farming, fishing, or anything like that, to then have, we're on the front line, so to speak, to sort of produce all this wonderful food on our farm, and to have that window of opportunity to sort of see what happens. It just gives me in a unique position to sort of see it from an outsider as well as an insider. But even the language is quite divisive. When I explain inside and outside, it doesn't have to be that way. So it's just breaking down those barriers that we just take for granted, and sort of take accountability and responsibility for the language we use as well, because that can have such a strong impact.
So a lot of times, I mean, I feel like we've seen some shift, but a lot of cookbooks seem to assume that food just sort of magically appears, not even at the store, just in people's homes, that it just like food fairies drop it in your fridge for you or something.
No matter how complicated the list of ingredients is, too.
Yeah. Even, like it's a Narnia situation that you open the pantry, and especially for those of us in rural areas, that you will have a fully stocked exotic spice cabinet just waiting for the one time of year that you get a wild hair to try to get your family to eat something different.
Definitely not.
Definitely not my house. Definitely not me over here with the 5 spice powder that's never been opened and is probably older than my children. I'm keeping it now. It's a family heirloom. Um so can you describe your cookbooks, and what would we, if we just flipped open one of your books, what would we find?
So the first series of 4 books really celebrate British farmers and fishermen. So they're called For the Love of the Land, which is celebrating British farmers and their food. And so I recruited 40 amazing farmers from all over the UK to contribute a recipe showcasing what they produce, as well as a story written in their own words about what they do, how they do it, and why. And then when people think of harvest, they automatically think of agriculture. They don't think of Harvest of the Sea. So I then did a sequel called For the Love of the Sea, which celebrates the British seafood community and their food. And then I published 2 very imaginatively entitled sequels, For the Love of the Land 2 and For the Love of the Sea 2. So there's a collection of over 160 recipes, which are really simple, that have been handed down for generations through the farming and the fishing families. So if you were to open up a copy, you'd find beautiful photography of not just cows and sheep and livestock and animals, but also lavender, asparagus, potatoes, all of those bountiful, delicious food from all over the country. And just really proud of the food provenance that's been celebrated in all of those books, and to give the opportunity for people to have their voice heard, especially women in both the agricultural and fishing industries, whose voices so often go unheard, and to give them an opportunity to share with the world what they do and what inspires them and what they're passionate about, written by themselves. I'm really proud of them, and I'm really proud that they've all been received quite enthusiastically in all the different industries. And then my most recent one is Islands in a Common Sea, stories of farming, fishing and food around the world. And that's the similar format, but celebrating farmers and fishermen from all over the world, from all continents, and flying the flag for their different countries.
I find it really interesting as someone who, I'm a foodie. That's how I ended up in farming, honestly. And for the geography challenged, I live about as far as you can get from an ocean in North America, I think. Like, we're real landlocked. It's really interesting to me to think of fishing as maybe a subset of agriculture, because I mean, obviously there are fish farms. We've interviewed some of them, but for wild caught fish, I mean, they're really kind of the only food producers that aren't farming something. And so it's, it's interesting because they are a part of food production, but they're not doing it the same way that we generally think of. And I think that's really interesting. And I'm wondering what your take is on how they fit into talking about agriculture when they are. I mean, they're certainly part of taking care of animals, but in a very different way than a lot of us are.
Yeah, well, we're very similar to where you live. We live in South Cambridgeshire, which is also very landlocked, and we couldn't be further away from the coast either. And I think when we talk about farming, we have to talk about fishing as well in the same breath, because there are so many similarities in the different challenges and the way that they look after the seas. They're the gatekeepers of the seas in the same way the farmers are the country custodians of the countryside. And I think with wild fishing, we've got the Alaskan salmon sisters in the book Islands in the Common Sea, who are catching wild salmon, and there's no one in the world who cares more deeply about their animals and the fish in the seas than the fishermen and the farmers. It's in their best interests because they want to conserve and have longevity of both their farming and their fishing communities. It's in their best interests to keep that going, and to keep that way of life living to its fullest, to pass it down to their generations and their descendants, and all their sons and daughters. And they do really genuinely have a concern and a genuine love for the animals that they look after, and the way that they nurture the animals, and the way that they ultimately provide food for people to enjoy. So I think it's really important to both talk about agriculture and fishing in the same breath, and I don't think enough people do that. I've definitely kind of evolved from someone who knew nothing about anything about food to someone who's really passionate about, having that conversation about farming and fishing in the same breath.
I think when we talk about how much we have in common, um, I mean, and that's, part of the title of your book is talking about things that we have in common also, between countries. It's amazing. We've had guests, I mean, all English speaking, obviously, because that's our first language, but guests from around the world on our podcast. And when you talk about, how much we do have in common, there's so much when it comes to agriculture. And, we probably need to think more about fishing ourselves, and the parenting side of our podcast too, because there's so many commonalities there. Are there things in your book that you really wanted to highlight in terms of the things that we have in common as farmers in your fifth book?
Yeah, definitely. I think I really passionately believe that there's more in the world that unites us than what divides us. And and the main premise of the book is that a farmer's and a fisherman's challenge and solution in this part of the world, in the United Kingdom, is very similar, if not the same, to a farmer's and a fisherman's challenge and solution on the other side of the world. So challenges like conflict, climate change, rising cost of living, rising cost of fuel and fertilizer, labour shortages, post-Brexit, post-pandemic, we all have the same similar challenges, and some may not be as obvious as others, but essentially we are all in it together. And I really think that if we are to reach a solution and solve these common issues, we need to listen to each other and share each other's stories, and share about regenerative agriculture, regenerative aquaculture. There are some fantastic, inspiring people doing amazing food innovation in production in both farming and fishing, and I think there's an awful lot of similarities, yeah, definitely.
Now, did you get to actually go to all of the countries that were profiled in your book? Because that sounds like a dream to me, honestly. Farm tours around the world, like, sign me up.
Me too. My dream is to have a sabbatical, take a year off, take my family with me and visit all these wonderful places. To be honest, no is the short answer, but I have been to a few of the places in my life. So there's a poultry farmer from Malawi. I went with my babysitter, who's now 86 years old. She started up a charity to raise funds to build children's schools and to fund children to go through their education system in Malawi. And I had the fortunate, fantastic opportunity to go and go with her for a couple of weeks. And I met the poultry farmer, and I met some wonderful people in Africa, and just fell in love with the country. It's just so beautiful. And so I've been to a few of the different places. So all the different connections are either a combination of my own personal connections or just from researching. I do a lot of reading. I love reading to bits. And one of the most exciting parts of the whole process is reading these amazing stories for the first time. So it was incredibly difficult to sort of select, because you only have so much room to actually produce something. So there's 25 people in the book, contributors, and so I would love to go and visit all of them in person. I went to the Netherlands recently because I'm actually adapting 3 of the chapters into 3 mini films in the hope that it could be made into something bigger. So that's the Netherlands, North India and South Africa. And so I had the fantastic opportunity to meet them in person and to say hello. Melanie and Jerome Klompe from Klompe Farm in the Netherlands, which was a real special time. It was really exciting. Yeah, it's good fun.
So I know, sorry, I'm just listening and thinking and getting actually all in my head today. Um, I've had the chance to travel to farms around the world and to places where I didn't speak the same language. And one of the things that fascinates me is there's a few things that you really don't need language to talk about, and food and farming is definitely on that list, you know. Um, so what are the things that surprised you about things that farmers and food people have in common?
Gosh, I think everybody loves food, and food can mean different things to different people. It can be communicative, it could be collaborative, it could be all of those wonderful positive things, but it can also mean a lot of darkness like poverty and death and stuff like that. So the common things between foodies and people who love food and farming is that in the developed world, there is no disconnect. There is no disconnection between the people who produce the food and the people who consume the food. They're very much one and the same thing. But when you go back to the Western civilization, or the developed world, there is this massive disconnect between our food and how it's produced. And we have become so disconnected with Mother Earth, and we've become so disconnected with the land and with the sea and with how food is made. And we've become so disconnected with generally simply food provenance. And I think we've lost that gratefulness and that appreciation of what food means to us and how it's made. I certainly came from a background of not knowing that and having been so incredibly ignorant about. I mean, I say a brief story. When you go to the supermarket, you have your chicken all, wrapped up in cellophane. But when I was in Malawi, we went to this local market and they said, choose a chicken. So we chose a couple of chickens. We took them home in the back of the truck. And I promised myself not to give them any names because I kind of had an inkling of what was going to happen. We took them back and we plucked them. We slit their throats, drained the blood, cooked them in the oven, and we ate the whole chicken apart from the beak. We ate the chicken feet, the eyes, everything. Nothing goes to waste. And that really taught me something that was really quite profound at the time in my early 20s. They really do appreciate food so much in terms of food provenance, in terms of nurturing and looking after their produce, and also looking after each other, and also education and educating their youngsters about, this is brutal, but this is the way of life. This is how it is. So I think there's an awful lot in common between fooded people and farmers, but there's I fear in America, in the UK, in the developed world, there is that massive disconnection.
So what is the Arlene, you just give up. Just give up. I'm just going to keep asking questions. Um Jenny, I know as a foodie, at least in the States, and I think it's changed some since we've gotten more into the farm to table movement. But for a long time, there was this real feeling, I think, that the only food worth talking about was fancy. And that if it was just normal people food, there was no point in talking about it. And I'm hoping that's getting better because, for myself at least, if I have to think about how to approach eating a dish, I don't want to eat it. If it's got, I was at a restaurant recently where it said it had pineapple infused air in my friend's drink. We still don't know what that means. We never did figure out what the hell they were talking about. To me, the food is about the connection with the people that you're eating with, or the connection with yourself as you're eating, and with the history and the provenance of that food. And to me, pineapple scented air, I mean, I'm going to laugh about it for a long time, but I do not connect with that. So I'm wondering, what your experience was like around that and around how fancy the recipes in your books are. And I'm going to feel really bad now if you're like, they all involve, you know, smoked salmon mousse ice cream or some, I don't know.
No, these are real recipes using real food from real people. There's nothing fancy, and it's not fine recipes for fine dining in my books. They're all really earthy, really they really offer that connection between what the people are growing and what they're producing and catching, with their story, how they do it, and what they produce in the kitchen at the end of it. So there's nothing fine dining about my books at all. These are proper homegrown recipes. There are, of course, some more challenging recipes sometimes in there, but predominantly all the recipes are ingredients that you would have at home, but you may have to make the right substitution for a particular ingredient if that's not available in your country. But in terms of pineapple infused air and things like that, I think to me that's on a different level. That's not just food, that's art. That's a work of art. And I think chefs are the translators between the food producers and the consumers. And they create this wonderful magic with this food to come up with something like pineapple infused air or whatever that might be, which I think is remarkable. And it just shows the extraordinary craft that some of these chefs enjoy. It's not for everyone, but I think, it's there to be appreciated, I think. And you wouldn't necessarily spend a fortune every day to go and eat something like that. But I think it's important to have that experience because it kind of opens up the world a little bit. And it just means different things to different people, doesn't it? And some people may not have the opportunity to go and sit in a fine dining restaurant and have, remarkable craft food in front of you, which is like art. And I think it should be treated like art and not just like your next meal. I think there's so many different opportunities there to treat food in different ways for different people.
Our goal as podcasters is to create a program that makes you feel less alone as a farming, ranching, or homesteading parent, but we can't do it alone.
Supporting Barnyard Language on Patreon helps us cover production costs and ensures the future of the show, but you'll also gain access to exclusive perks and behind-the-scenes content.
Your support enables us to continue bringing you the thought-provoking conversations and inspiring stories week after week. So if you find value in what we're doing and want to be part of the Barnyard community, head over to patreon.com/barnyardlanguage and choose a tier that suits you.
I think, in my defense, I spent 20-some years in restaurants and dealt with a lot of chefs who were very peasant food is for peasants kind of folks, and was lucky enough that the last place I worked was with a chef who was very pro farm to table, very pro, knowing your growers, and the experience was so much more enjoyable just because the working with ingredients that you really respect and working with people that you really respect is so different than this came off a truck and now I'm going to see what I can do to it. It's kind of, ugh.
Yeah, I'm passionate about buying local, buying seasonal, buying sustainable, and wherever you are in the country, buying from your own country. Just because, you know, local food is just so much better for you and better for the planet and better for the environment and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I couldn't agree more, but I think there is a certain place for fine dining, for that to show what food can be done and for chefs to have that opportunity to show their craft. But all the recipes are all really accessible, and believe you me, if I can cook them, anybody can. And I really mean that. I'm not a chef. I'm just an enthusiastic home cook, and actually I find cooking to be a little bit of a chore. I'm always cooking the same dishes all the time for my two children, and I find it quite boring actually. However, we're actually sort of preparing a special dinner with some family and friends coming over in the next few weeks, and I'm really excited about that. I've created a little menu, and we're shopping, buying local, and if we grow it in the garden, we're making apple pie because the apples are, on the trees and things like that. So, you know, I think it's different, isn't it? You do different cooking for different occasions and for different people. And that to me is what I love. There's nothing more in the world that I love than a long table surrounded by my family and my friends and providing food for them. But I couldn't do it every day. It's just impossible.
It's actually really reassuring to know that even someone who's written cookbooks sometimes finds the day-to-day of cooking a chore, because there's definitely that feeling in our houses too.
It is a chore. It is. I cook like pesto pasta, spaghetti bolognese, like all the time, and until I'm like screaming from the walls, thinking, please try something else. Please eat something a bit more exciting. But yeah, it is a chore. It is. I mean, that's the real reality of it. And what I really resent are all these television programs where a lot of television programs these days are really kind of emphasizing all of this wonderful cooking and up against the clock all the time. And it doesn't have to be pressured. It doesn't have to be that way in the kitchen. It can be just really chilled, and getting batch cooking or doing a slow cooker recipe so you can put the washing on and go and do something in the garden and something that's a bit more practical. And there doesn't seem to be that much realness in any of the sort of media or the broadcasting, unfortunately.
I have to admit that I have a real problem with those, 20-minute recipe sort of things too, because it's 20 minutes if all of your produce is already chopped and your pan of water is already boiling and, you had everything all laid out. And I think even as an experienced cook, part of me still falls for this is totally going to be ready in 20 minutes. And then people feel bad about themselves when an hour and a half later they're feeding their kids frozen chicken nuggets because dinner's not ready because it took 20 minutes for the pan of water to boil, let alone everything else. And, I find that maddening. Anyway, sorry, Arlene.
That's all right. So I was going to ask, because I happen to know that you also do a radio show, plus your cookbooks and your writing. And so I'm thinking about, from our experience finding guests for the show, there's a lot of work that goes into those connections and research and finding stories to tell people about. So how do you make those connections and continue to tell stories in your community and in the publications that you write for all the time?
Yeah, so when I first did the books, word got out about the first book and people started asking me to be in it, which was incredibly flattering. So it was just a combination of like my own personal connections, who my husband knew in the industry, and also just like one door opens and another door opens and so forth. And similarly to my radio show, I'm always finding guests every week. And you're right, there's such a lot of pressure to maintain that momentum in it's a weekly show, so you're always wanting to find guests to come on, and it's a lot of pressure actually. But I try and keep it as local as possible, but also invite other household names who are probably better known around the country. So there's a bit of a mix. There's a bit of local stories and also national interest opinion as well. And we play the world's greatest music as well, so that's intermingled with all the chit chat. So yeah, I love it. I think it's a lot of pressure to maintain that standard and to maintain the guests each and every week. So a lot of people come to me saying that they want to come on it, which is lovely. And equally, I go out there and I try and find support and invite people. And more than what happens is I just panic and I suddenly think, oh my goodness, I haven't got anyone for the next like 5 weeks. And I just blitz everyone I know, everyone in the industry is, will you come on my show? And then most of the time they do come back and say, yes, we'll come on. Let's hook up either by a Zoom or face to face, which is really lovely. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix. So yeah.
Sounds similar to our process. So that's good for us.
Oh, good.
So you mentioned earlier that you are not just farming and doing all these other things that we've talked about, but you also have accommodations on farm. And I think that that's probably more common in the UK, but I know that there's definitely people in the US and Canada who, a lot of people think about it. Some people actually do it. And I think with things like Airbnb and VRBO and those types of programs, more online platforms, even Harvest House, stuff like that, more people are considering it. So can you describe kind of what kind of facilities you have, what you offer, and if there's any advice that you would want to share with someone who's maybe thinking about doing that on farm?
Yeah, so we're very lucky. We chose to. It was just shortly after I met my husband, and he got a grant from the EU, what was then the EU, about 12 years ago, to transform or diversify and renovate disused farm buildings into what they are now, which is 7 luxury self-catering cottages, and then we've also got 2 Airbnb log cabins as well. And we're quite lucky because a lot of farms tend to be quite isolated, and we live on a private airfield as well, and we've got the self-catering cottages, so there's always a buzz of life happening around the place, which is actually really lovely, really comforting, and you can just walk out the door and there'll be someone there to say hello to you, and it's really lovely. They are luxury self-catering cottages, 7 of them. I'm in one right now, and and when your internet goes down, you've got the option of going to one of the cottages and jumping on that internet. So, so that's great.
And you've got a clean backdrop behind you, probably.
Yeah, we're very proud of them. We've had them for about 11 years now, and we have different dynamic of consumers, customers and guests who come and enjoy them. We have a lot of hen parties, couples, families, business people, contractors, people who are coming to stay in between house moves. So we have quite a varied consumer base, which is wonderful. But just with cost of living at the moment, which is increasing, we're finding that if people have a disposable income, if they want to go abroad rather than stay in the UK. So we're getting a lot of last minute bookings at the moment, but we just got to sit tight and just hope for the best, really.
So when it comes to things like booking and cleaning and all those types of things, what kind of extra work is it for you, or do you hire staff, or how does all of that kind of stuff work?
Yeah, so we hire local staff who've been with us right from the very beginning. So they've been with us for about 11 years. We have a lady who does the ironing, and then we have a group of housekeepers, about 4 or 5, who come in every week and do all of that. And we have this most brilliant bookings lady called Stacey, who's on the other end of the phone and the emails. And we also have a maintenance guy who does a lot of the maintenance. But my husband is always pulled in so many different directions with the farm, the airfield, the cottages, the maintenance. It's a lot of work because you're constantly maintaining the level of standard that people expect when they're paying for a product. So there's an awful lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, but we have a fantastic team of people to help us out, and we wouldn't be able to do it without them.
So if someone was thinking about getting into self-catering or some kind of on-farm accommodations, are there things that were unexpected, or that you think that someone should prepare for, that maybe you hadn't considered before you started into it?
So I personally believe that collaboration rather than competition. Collaboration is everything. And I'm really passionate about collaborating with other local independent businesses. And so, for example, we have our little black book where it's just a list of other local independent businesses who are really passionate about what they do. So we have a private chef, a visiting spa person, we have a mobile dog groomer, we have all these little pockets of businesses, and we group them all into a big folder, a big book for anyone who wants to use it to really enhance their stay. And my advice would be to really collaborate with your other local accommodation providers, because if, you know, Joe Bloggs down the road is full, he can phone you up and say, do you have any spare accommodation for the overspill, you know, that he can't accommodate, and so forth. So we've got the Coach House in Potton, which is a little village next door, and they sometimes phone up asking us, do you have any spare rooms, and vice versa. So there's no such thing as competition. Really, really collaborate with your neighbours. That's my top tip.
That's a good way to think about it, for sure. And then you're not offering all kinds of services that maybe don't get used, you know, frequently, or you're stretching yourself too thin to, but you can support other businesses in that way.
So, how often do you, as the mother of young children, how often do you find yourself saying that you need to go check on one of the cabins, and then just like staying down there for 45 minutes or 3 hours? Or I would never come back in my house if I had somewhere else to go.
Yeah, if there's a clean space, clean quiet space somewhere steps away.
Some friends and I have actually joked about renting an apartment together, and we were just gonna just like a studio apartment, like one room even, with like a white couch, white curtains, no clutter, a tea kettle, and a cat. And that would be it. And it would just be, yes, absolutely, Jenny, anytime. Maybe we could rent out the space above like the local bookstore or the local yarn shop. Even as like a co-working space, people could rent it for like 3 hours at a crack and just.
Yes. Can I come with you?
You did book us a spot, right, Arlene?
And I mean, I will admit, I looked at Jenny's website, and she also has hot tubs. So I mean, like, I might never go home.
Just come over here. Come over here on holiday. Just come and stay with us for a couple of weeks.
Yes, yeah, our next business trip, Katie will create one.
We can justify it somehow, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's right. So why don't we use that as our transition point to start talking about kids, because we are an ag podcast, but we're also a parenting podcast. So we often ask our guests, and not just women and men, but we often ask guests about that transition time of when you first became a parent, and what that change in your life was like for you personally and as a couple, and how it changed how you looked at things, and all the things that happen when you go from 0 to 1.
Honestly, it was awful. When I first gave birth, I mean, there's nothing in the world that prepares you for having a baby. Nothing in the world. And when I think people can easily forget that when a baby is born, a mother is born as well. And I had undiagnosed postnatal depression, and it was a really, really tough time. I found it really difficult. I didn't sort of become very natural to it to begin with. I didn't really have the support that I really thought I would have. So I found it very difficult. And again, with my second daughter, I also found it very difficult again, because you had that sort of level of expectation. You thought you knew what you were doing, and of course you don't really. So I found it really difficult. But then as time got on and I was diagnosed with that, and then once you have a diagnosis you can treat it, and it just all becomes more clear. It becomes more, not easy, but acceptable. And when we talk about mental health, it's a more of an open, acceptable conversation to have in this day and age. So in all honesty, I really struggled. But as the children have grown up, and I'm in a really good place now, and yeah, it's wonderful. I wouldn't change anything for the world. I feel very lucky. But then looking back, I think it's been a really tough time, but really lovely and incredibly rewarding. And it's all part of it, isn't it? I'm sure the story is quite common in amongst young mothers. So yeah, it's just a big, massive learning process. I find it comforting to think that nobody really knows what they're doing and everyone's just winging it. I hope that's the general consensus.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean that's the common answer we get, right? Is that that people didn't know what they were doing and it was so much harder than they expected. And, as much as I felt the last, well, probably since becoming a parent, that I almost feel bad going to a baby shower and being like, should I tell them? But what can you say, right? No one can prepare you for what is to come. And so, I guess that we all just hope that, after the baby arrives, that we can be supportive in some way. And I think talking about it and being honest about how hard it is does contribute to people who are in the trenches or in that, dark forest, to be able to at least speak up and say, yeah, this is not what I expected, and it is really hard.
And it's such a shock for me personally, because I'd always consider myself to be a fairly confident, outgoing person. And I think it was the anxiety that really crippled me, that really shocked me. And I still have that anxiety to this day. But I'm more aware of it. And you're right, you just want to sort of open your heart and just let people know about what it's really like. But I don't know if it's anyone's place to do that. It's almost as if everyone has to have their own personal journey that they need to go on in order to sort of transit from going from 0 to 1 to 2 or to 3. But yeah, I find it a really interesting subject. And just living on the farm, being a farmer's wife has its unique challenges. Definitely. But I wouldn't change it for the world. It's just a way of life, isn't it? That's just completely unique.
That's really the reason that we started the podcast, was because there's tons of parenting podcasts out there, but we really didn't feel like the perspective of people who are involved in agriculture and raising kids at the same time was, because it's so unique, that it was reflected in other places. So as time has gone on, how have you and your husband, I'm not going to use the word balance, but how have you and your husband juggled family life and the farm and businesses and those types of things in ways that have worked at various ages and stages for you?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because with the different ages and stages, I do think that as my daughters grow up, we have more opportunity to do other things for ourselves, because our time is freed up a little bit in terms of them being at school, in school hours. So we do put an awful lot of pressure on ourselves that we have 6 hours to do everything. So it's a lot of pressure, but we're such a good team, my husband and I. We don't necessarily have much help, but my parents are like 82 and 76, so there's only so much they can do. They're very happy to sit and do art and craft with the girls and all of that kind of thing, and they would come and babysit a few evenings and every now and then. And we have a fantastic mother's helper who comes in a couple of hours a week just to take just to do sort of bed lining and stuff like that, which really helps. And as the girls have got older, her hours have reduced and she's just become sort of like a babysitter now. But I think it's so important for every couple, if you can, to find that time just to spend it together as adults, as away from the children, just so you have that identity and that individual closeness that you used to sort of have. I think that's really important. And it is all about balancing and juggling, and everyone's busy. Everybody's busy, doing whatever. And I don't know how we do it, but we just sort of muddle on through like everybody else, I think. Yeah, it's challenging, isn't it? Obviously, harvest time is the more challenging time, because John is on the combine or the tractor of all hours of the day, and drilling, post harvest, it doesn't stop after harvest. We're in the middle of drilling and slug pelleting and all of that kind of stuff. So the winter kind of quietens down a little bit, so we kind of balance out a little bit. So I do more work during the winter and he does more work during the summer, so I've got the freedom now to do a little bit of my own thing, like my writing and my radio, which kind of ticks along in the background. And it is just communication is key, and just to keep talking to each other. That is just, the biggest thing really, and being tolerant of each other as well is a big thing.
Definitely. So what is your favorite thing about raising kids on the farm?
That's such a difficult question. Favorite thing, I think it's literally just being at one with the seasons and seeing how the year changes, because you're so close to everything that happens naturally. And you've got the freedom of the space as well. My favourite thing is just watching them grow up, and we could be anywhere, quite frankly. We could be on the farm, we could be off the farm. It's just watching them grow up, and you could literally be anywhere, really. That's the best thing, and it's just so shocking and scary how time flies, really. And another year has gone by, and yeah, they just grow up so quick, don't they?
Yes, definitely. I'm looking up at a couple of mine now, and that is that is wild. I get my good night hugs now from people who are 6 inches taller than me.
Oh, that's so nice.
So, Jenny, what's your biggest parenting struggle now?
Now, oh gosh, parenting struggle. I think it's always thinking, am I doing enough as a parent for my children? So if I, for example, for work, if I have to go down to London or something, I just feel so guilty that I'm doing something not for my children. So I think that's a big, massive struggle for me. Is constantly asking myself, am I doing enough for my children? And I don't know if I am. I don't know if anyone would tell me if I'm not. And nobody says that you are. So I think it's a struggle knowing that what you're doing is the right thing. You haven't really got anyone to sort of, other than your partner and maybe your family. I don't know. It's just that constant worry that you're not doing enough for them, or that you can do better, but you're not quite sure how to. I think it's more sort of an emotional perception that you're bringing up these two little humans, and you want them to be the best that they possibly can be, in terms of being kind, in terms of sharing, in terms of learning and listening and caring for others. I think as every parent wants to do the best for their children, but am I good enough for them? I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard because there's no checklist, or there's no marker to be like, there, I did that thing. It's one and done, right? I completed that task, and now that's good, right? It's just the ongoing, and yeah, the questioning of whether you're getting it right, and who knows, right? there's with multiple kids, there's even if you do it right, quote unquote, by one, maybe it's not what's right for the other one, and who knows? We're all just doing our best, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think we are just all doing our best, aren't we? And yeah, yeah. And also cooking, getting them to eat different stuff and not just pesto pasta every week. That would be
Yes,
nice.
yeah, that would be nice. Do you have any farm specific parenting advice that you would share with someone? I love your advice to, make time for your relationship too, but on the parenting side, do you think there's anything on the farm that you've learned about parenting specifically?
I know it's really difficult, but I always put my family first and foremost. I'm always prioritizing the family, and the family is not just my husband, it's not just my children, it's all four of us. And I think it's difficult, especially during times of harvest and drilling, to have all four of you together. Like, for example, this last previous harvest, I made an effort to really get the children out on a picnic on the field, so John could come off the tractor and he can join us for lunch, and all four of us are there together. Whereas last time, I don't think I ever left the house because it was just too difficult. It was just too hard to get the children out and go and visit him on the tractor. I just found it really hard, with everything else that you have to do. So I really sort of made an effort to have some family time. I think is really important.
All right, so we ask all of our guests, if you were going to dominate a category at the county fair, what would it be? And categories can be real or made up to ensure that you win.
Oh my gosh, I haven't thought about this at all. What, any category? Oh my gosh. Probably I'd have to say cookbooks.
Yes, you've got a leg up there for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And we already know you're award winning, so I mean, you're a shoo-in.
Yeah, I'm sorry to be so boring, but yeah.
That's all right. It's a great category. So we will go ahead and move into our cussing and discussing segment. If you're a listener and want to submit yours, you can use our speak pipe or send us an email. Katie, what are you cussing and discussing this week?
Well, we're also in the middle of harvest here, like Jenny is. And Arlene, I think you're finished, but I'm sure it's the same seasonish.
No, the combine's here this week. The corn's coming off.
Oh, well, never mind. It's just harvest all over the northern hemisphere.
Yeah, we're recording at the end of October. This is coming out later, but just for reference, yes, we're in harvest mode.
I would like to discuss the value of having friends who are in the same stage of life, and especially in agriculture, friends who are in the same literal season of life. Because I have it on good authority that I am not the only one who is really struggling this harvest season. And it is so nice to have people to talk to who don't try to give you advice about how to fix it. Because on some level, I mean, obviously there are tweaks like taking picnics out to the field. These things are great. It's still harvest. It's still going to suck. It's still planting. It's still going to suck. That is just the way it is. If it's not like that at your farm, either tell us how you do it or don't talk to anybody about it because somebody's going to be mad at you. Um, but to have the friend who just understands that at some point the only way out of these things is through, and your only options are to suck it up, get divorced, or sell the farm. And none of those options is great, but it's nice to have someone who understands that some days those are your options and who can just cheer you on through that rather than.
And put a plug in, even if you're not one of those people who has a literal friend who has that in common with you, you can come join the Barnyard Language Facebook group, because that's where us farmers and parents are hanging out. And even if in your neighborhood you don't have someone who understands, there's somebody somewhere who does, right? Because we're in England, Canada, and the US, and we're all speaking the same language right now because we all understand that there are certain times a year where it's just hard. And yes, it'll get better in the winter, and yes, things will be different later, but yeah, right now it just doesn't seem like enough of us to go around.
It is not unlike having children in general.
Yes,
You
that's
know.
right. But you have children and harvest, that's even harder.
Jenny, what do you have to cuss and discuss today?
I'd like to cuss and discuss. So a lot of with some friends of mine have been talking about how the UK completely thrives off charity because there seems to be a complete gap in. Does it have to be parenting related?
No, whatever you want, go for it.
Well, if not, the whole world is thriving off charity because politics doesn't do enough for the general public, and it's just increasingly frustrating that and not enough happens from the top down. People aren't prioritizing food, farming, or fishing, and there's only so much people from the ground up can do. And I think there's a time when people from the top down need to sort of meet halfway, and that's not happening. So, yeah, that's my major cuss for the moment.
So true. And it seems like, especially in times like now, when there's so much discussion around how expensive food is and how the cost of living is going up, and people are struggling, and yet we know the reality is that farmers are not getting paid more. And we also buy.
Wait, you guys aren't. You guys didn't get that 90% pay raise? Shit. Okay.
No, we're not raking it in over here. And we also buy food. So we have the same cost of living increases plus the cost of inputs. We all know that they're going up. And yet, the constant struggle seems to be that the price for our product really doesn't change that much, even though everything else increases.
And it's exactly the same here in the UK and mainland Europe. It's the same struggles, it's the same challenges, and yet nothing, it's the same thing that's been happening for centuries, and yet nothing changes. And no policy has been implemented to change that or to make significant positive change or progression. It's just we're stagnant, and it's the same story all the time. Farmers aren't getting the fair price from all the corporates and the supermarkets, and it's just terrible for some people, and there's not much we can do about it. And it's a big shout out to all the charities who are just doing so much, and the volunteers as well as the food producers who do so much.
Arlene, what do you have to cuss and discuss?
So this feels really trivial compared to both of your bigger picture concepts, but mine is the fact that because it's harvest, the corn in the field across the road from me is gone. And now I can see the new housing development that is going up. And I'm trying to think positively about the fact that we're going to have hopefully some lovely new neighbors who are going to love the fact that they live across the road from a farm. But I am still struggling with the idea that there are going to be that many more houses right next to fields where active production is happening. And I know that in the UK that this is, you have to deal with it a lot more than we do. But just, the potential for conflict between neighbors is always there. And especially when we're actively farming and have large equipment and are doing things like spreading manure and raising livestock that make noise and make poop, I hope that everything is going to go well, but it just was that reminder that, the cornfield that had kind of been blocking the construction site that I still see because I drive by it and I walk by it when I'm out with the dog, that it's right around the corner, but it's probably going to be great. So, Jenny, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to connect with you from across the pond. If people want to get in touch with you, find your cookbooks, learn more about your farm, or find a place to stay if they're going to England, where should they find you on the internet?
Yeah, they can find me on my website, jennyjefferies.co.uk, or follow me on Instagram at JennyLJefferies, and our cottages are called Fuller's Hill Cottages. So do check us out.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much. It was great to meet you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you for joining us on Barnyard Language. If you enjoy the show, please support us on Patreon with a donation.
Big thanks go out to our show editor, Krista Paffrath at the Rural Podcast Network.
Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen, and follow the show so you never miss an episode.
If you want to connect with other farming families, join the private Barnyard Language Facebook group.
We are always in search of future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, get in touch.